Hello and welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast. I just want to give a shout out to our listeners in Iceland and Barbados. I think this is wonderful. Our podcast supremo, Ben, has been checking the stats for this podcast and it seems we're very popular in both countries. I mean, I just can't believe it. It's wonderful. I'm really thrilled. I've never been to Iceland or Barbados. I would love to visit both. Maybe one day. So hello to you wonderful, forward-thinking Icelanders. It might have sounded like I was trying to do an Icelandic impression. I wasn't. It just came out wrong. Icelanders and Barbadians. And I'm not going to tell the joke that Craig Charles, my very good friend Craig, who I work with on Red Dwarf, I'm not going to tell the joke that he once told me about the barman on the beach at the beach bar in Barbados. I'm not going to tell you that joke because it's not appropriate for this podcast, but I can't help thinking of it whenever I think of Barbados. I'd love to go. It must be amazing. It does look wonderful. Anyway, enough of all that. All you lovely podcast listeners are in for another data-rich renewable energy smorgasbord in this episode, because a little later we'll be bringing you another of the talks we recorded at Fully Charged Live in June of this year. This talk is all about solar and storage and ways of using solar on the street. It's called Streetwise Solar. It's self-explanatory. It's very interesting. It was a really good talk. So in case you didn't know, solar and storage is the single most rapidly growing sector in the entire global energy sector. Yeah. Now, you might ask, why is that, Robert? And I'd love you to ask that, because then I could answer it. But I can't hear you asking it. So in my normal belligerent way, I'm going to tell you anyway. It's got nothing to do with greenwashing or being kind to the planet or any kind of token environmental posturing. It's simply to do with money. It's basic free market economics. It's what drives the capitalist world with such joy and freedom. Yeah. Anyway, but here's an example. In July this year, the LA Department of Water and Power, that's basically the people who run the power and the water in Los Angeles, fairly obvious in the title, in Los Angeles, in the United States of America, they've just signed a contract for a solar and storage supply deal at the cost of 1.9 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, what does that even mean? I don't hear you ask, but I'm asking it for you. So just to put that in perspective, the average wholesale electricity cost in the USA is around 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, that's not what the end user pays. If you live in a house in Los Angeles, you don't pay 7 cents a kilowatt hour, you pay more than that. It's what the utilities pay on the open market when they buy wholesale electricity at terawatt hours, capacity, like they buy a lot, not just a few bits to run the light bulbs. But the fact that a major power buyer is now able to purchase wholesale electricity for under 2 cents a kilowatt hour has raised eyebrows around the world in the energy sector. And I'm sure it probably sent shivers through the beleaguered halls of the Koch brother. Yes, because you may have heard of the Koch brothers. Well, one of them died last week. I'm not saying anything horrible about it. One doesn't wish ill of the dead. But he wasn't possibly one of the nicest human beings that's ever existed on the planet. Let's just put it like that. So they won't be happy about it. And other reactionary blowhards in the increasingly fragile and frantic fossil fuel industry are probably bricking it, to put it bluntly. 2 cents a kilowatt hour, they simply cannot compete at that price. Burning coal, burning gas, burning oil, or indeed, as we often talk about, nuclear fuel. Those are all more expensive. But here's a really interesting idea that will be coming up in an episode coming up shortly about fusion power. Nuclear fusion, not nuclear fission, which is what we do now, nuclear fusion, which has been 40 years in the future for the last 50 years. But Helen Chesky went to see an amazing fusion company outside Oxford recently. The report is amazing. I've just finished editing it. It's quite complicated, but it's fascinating. And this is a phenomenal amount of power with zero waste. It doesn't have nuclear waste, radioactive waste. No, it just has none. Totally carbon neutral. And what they talk about is not the first gigawatt, which we now know we can supply with wind, with solar, with storage. It's the final gigawatt. It's at those periods of time when we can't store that much electricity. It is dark. It's not windy. A lot of people are using electricity. That's the bit, the gap we've got to fill. The guy that is pushing nuclear fusion is obsessed and totally dedicated to renewables. He thinks renewables are the answer, but he's trying to produce the final, gigawatt hour. It's not the first one. First one's easy. The 500th is easy. The final one, which you really, really need to keep the world going, is more of a challenge. It's really interesting. So I can't wait for you to see that. But okay, now just to put all this in context, because I know people get anxious about this, this is a huge solar development in California, which, let's be frank, has a very ample supply of sunshine. But this is the important bit. It's the batteries, the multiple megawatt hour batteries, which make solar a less and less intermittent power source. We have a lot of solar in the UK. There's huge amounts of solar in places like Denmark and the Netherlands, which have the same, if not worse, weather and clouds than we do. So it's not impossible to use here. And if you can store that power, today was a great example for me. I have solar and I have storage here. Well, there's way more sunshine today because it's one of the very hot days that you might remember by the time you listen to this, that we have in the UK. Absolutely crystal clear blue sky all day, amazing amount of solar. In fact, I'm just going to check now on my phone. Sorry about that. What have we done today? Let me look. So today I've done 28.8 kilowatt hours of solar power, which I've got off the solar panels. Well, about 15 of that has gone into the battery, but then I use some. I've now been charging a car for the last 2 hours. I've added about 80 miles to a car using that. And so I now won't use any electricity from the grid this evening when we're back here and we're all cooking and watching telly and having showers and everything. That will, our usage of solar, of grid electricity today will be in the 1 or 2%. Very, very low. Yes, because that is another episode that's coming up, which I'm very excited about, and it is quite frightening because it's quite a big operation. Because some long-term viewers may know I've already got a Tesla Powerwall in my house, and I'm expanding that and installing a vehicle-to-grid charging unit, 3-phase electricity, another battery, more solar. I mean, I'm not long for this world, so I may as well go for it. That's been my decision. So our house is turning into a kind of experimental laboratory. Amazing stuff. Zappy charger, which is what I'm using at the moment, only takes electricity that would normally go into the grid, puts it in the car. The Mixergy hot water tank, amazing. I mean, we've done episodes about these things. I don't want to drone on about them too long, but that's amazing. That heats water so fast. It's unbelievable. It's like literally you've got a whole tank full of cold water and 4 minutes later you could have a shower. It's incredible. And that runs 90% of the time, particularly in the summer, on solar power. It's a very, very clever system. There's a lot of complex electronics that are outside way above my pay grade, but still really interesting. So obviously things are changing, but of course, there are very powerful companies who are not in the least bit concerned about clean energy systems and are carrying on fracking, for goodness sake, fracking like there's no tomorrow. And let's be honest, the no tomorrow option is looking a bit more likely every year. So I think we should be concerned about these things, and we should make a fuss, and we should moan on about it, and we should make the frackers of the world's lives an utter depressing misery. Well, we don't have to in the UK at the moment because they've done it for us. Quadrilla, such a lovely energy company, are test fracking just outside Blackpool in Lancashire. Yeah. Marvellous. I mean, it's been a huge success, hasn't it, fracking in the United States, with almost no serious downsides. Really. I mean, hardly any problems for the people who live anywhere near the fracking sites in the USA. There have been 0 negative reports. If you've seen those negative reports, they're all made up by... I can't remember who it would be. I can't remember the list. I'll have to look on a subreddit for the list of unbelievably knuckle-dragging, stupid terms. Sorry, I'm just going off on one now. I shouldn't have a rant. I'm not having a rant about this. This is an actual report about fracking. So, yes, this morning there was a bit of an earthquake in the fracking area in Lancashire. 2.9 on the Richter scale, the strongest ever recorded in the UK. We don't get earthquakes in the UK. We've had like 1 or 2 every century. And this is directly related to fracking, to drilling down into the shale rock and pumping it full of incredibly high pressure water and chemicals. What a brilliant, sensible idea. So yes, 2.9 on the Richter scale. No one died, just a bit of shaking. Just your house shook a bit and your plates fell off the shelf. It's fine. The cupboard rattled across the room in some poor woman's bedroom. You know, it's fine. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to see here. Move along now. Now, thankfully, due to the just about existing regulations we still have at the moment, Cuadrilla have had to stop the operation for now. I don't know how long for, but quite a long time, as they had to earlier on this year. It's been an absolute disaster, their fracking experiments. So the fracking boom we've all been told again and again to be happy about, well, it just popped. It wasn't a boom, it was a... It's such an absurd panic reaction in, you know, stupid thing. What are we going to do? We're going to run out of gas. Crack. Start fracking. You know, it's so short-sighted and stupid, and investing millions of pounds to try and eke out the last little fart of so-called natural gas that we burn to make steam to generate electricity. I mean, please, is that really the best you can do, Cuadrilla? It is tragic. It is pathetic. Anyway, there is no fracking taking place in the UK at the moment, thanks to Cuadrilla, so that's a good thing. Anyway, let's listen to some really intelligent people who have a far more positive and progressive attitude to energy and how we make it and what we do with it when we've made it. This talk was recorded during Fully Charged Live back in June 2019, and the title is Streetwise Solar. It features 3 wonderful panellists. They really were brilliant. Chris Pateman-Jones, sorry, that's a message from my wife on my phone when I should have turned it to silent while I'm recording a podcast. How unprofessional is that? So the 3 wonderful panellists that were on this particular discussion are Chris Pateman-Jones from Connected Kerb, brilliant company, Chris Jardine from Joju Solar, amazing, they installed my solar panels on my house, and John Bloomfield from Solar Plants. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the talk from Fully Charged Live 2019. Save it to the end. Save it to the end. We've got a really. I'm really excited about this. These are really. They're fun for me, and I hope you enjoyed them too. We're going to be talking about the concepts of charging cars and the really important aspect of using renewables to do that. That's the kind of overarching theme of this talk. But I'd like to introduce the panel. They are Chris Jardine from Joju Solar, Chris Pateman-Jones from Connected Kerb, and John Bloomfield from Solar Plants. Please welcome them onto the stage. Thank you. Now, Chris, I'm going to explain. Chris Jardine and I have known each other for some time. Chris installed the solar on my house and the Powerwall battery in my house. You may have seen him on Fully Charged. So, Chris, how's it going now that no one in the whole world or UK is ever going to install solar again because of the VAT hike? Let's start there.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing, well, obviously a couple of policy changes. So the feed-in tariffs for solar PV ended at the end of March. And I think many people expected the industry to fall off a cliff edge. There have been some stories. There was a story in The Guardian the other day that said that there'd been a 94% drop in solar PV installations. Now, from my own personal experience, I just don't believe those numbers at all.
Right. Oh, good. That's good to hear.
From Joju Solar's experience, actually our inquiries are up and our installations are up compared to when feed-in tariffs were in place.
Wow.
And I think there's possibly a number of reasons for that. Just to explain the 94% figure, in order to get the feed-in tariff, you needed to register your installation with the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, the MCS, in order to qualify for the feed-in tariff payments. Now there's no feed-in tariff payments. I'm suspecting that a lot of people just aren't registering their systems with MCS anymore.
There's no need to.
So I think there may be a 94% drop in registrations.
Right.
but not a 94% drop in installations. Coupled with that, I think we're seeing important things. We're seeing Extinction Rebellion, David Attenborough, Greta Thunberg, all playing into this climate change narrative, and I think it is stirring people into action at the moment. And for that reason, I think we are going to continue to see people installing solar. And also, the other thing we're seeing is, particularly with audiences like this, people buy an electric car, they want to run their car on sunshine, and they go out and buy a PV system, and it really is as simple as that. And that's one reason why I feel very optimistic about the future of solar over the next coming years.
Thank you. That's very encouraging to hear. Chris Pateman-Jones, the Connected Kerb. Now, I just want to quickly explain that you've been in touch with us for a long time to go and film what you do, and we haven't quite got around to it yet. It's my fault.
In fairness, we're pretty new, so...
You were quite new. But can you explain...
We were talking about a concept before, now, now we're real. So
you're real, and they really exist. So can you explain the idea behind what you're doing?
Yeah, so we'd agree completely with what you've just said around the environmental agenda here. So we're a smart cities EV charging company. We deploy advanced smart chargers into the street. We're focused on that portion of the population who doesn't have a driveway, and also people who park in long-stay car parks. So dwell time is critical for us. So anywhere you're parked for more than 3 or 4 hours, and that's because we charge between 3 to 7.5 kilowatts. So focus on that long sort of dwell time. In terms of the environmental side, we'd agree there seems to be a massive uptick, and we get a lot of interest on that side. Noting the fact that we're after those people who don't have driveways, our clients tend to not be the individual. They tend to be large housing estates or developers or local authorities or the large car park operators. And from the pure environmental side, we aim to try and make EV green. And I know that sounds like a strange thing, but if you look at the components that go into an awful lot of EVs and the charging points themselves, there's an awful lot of stuff that is not recyclable or not recycled. So we've tried to make ours as long life as possible. So we separate the charger from the plug so that it doesn't matter whether you move to an induction charging model, we're still relevant. But we also use 85% recycled materials in all of our components. So our kit, the charger itself is 3.5 recycled truck tires, and the node box that goes beneath the ground that houses the smart cities components, so the breakers, the meter, the IoT technology, is in a container which is made out of 3,500 recycled plastic bags.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a cool kit.
So, because I think what we're all used to seeing at the moment on streets is a post with usually a very bright blue light round, which is useful because that helps you see it, and then a socket in that. But it's a piece of street furniture that kind of intrudes into where pedestrians go or whatever. But this is not that. Yeah, well, our worry was we think if you're going to focus on giving people who don't have driveways the same opportunity as people who do have driveways, you need to deploy a lot of these chargers. If you do that, you're going to change the look and feel of all the streets that we live on. So we've tried to make something as low visual and environmental impact as possible. So you use existing street furniture to deploy the chargers, and you can do that because we make the socket small because the charger sits beneath the ground. And the other thing was, again, without discrediting other charging points, if you do move to a model which is not traditional plug-in, which, and let's be clear, no one knows what's happening beyond the next 5 years, but we think that you can build flexibility into your system by separating the socket from the charger, and that means that you're sort of future-proofed as to whatever the charging model is, really. Right. So, I mean, is it then like a hump in the curb? Yeah, it's like that low. It's right down. So we have a couple depending on the scenario. So we have one which is called an armadillo, which sits as a sort of a lump on or an oval that sits right on the pavement. Obviously, that's not suitable everywhere because it could be in the pathway for people. If you've got a nice wide pathway, or if there's a green verge at a car park, you'd put that in. If you have a normal street, every 3 to 4 bays in the street has to have a parking post with the regulations on it. Right. So we basically use that parking post and we enable it. So instead of using a lamp column, we use that because then we can put our own power supply in there so we can get a higher charge. Right. And then we can put all the other smart stuff in it as well. So as standard, we deploy air quality monitors, parking sensors, and then I think probably the most popular thing in the room would be we deploy super fast Wi-Fi wherever we go. So on all our pilot sites, we're at 450 megabits per second, which is free to everyone on the street. So we're creating this mini smart cities. And then we're trying to get to a gig by the end of this year. And we were going to be deploying 5G, but with the uncertainty around Huawei, we decided we might wait until that's resolved. But on the whole, That sounds quite good, doesn't it? Just saying. So we will have to come and do an episode.
Please do.
I've got to plug into a smart curb. John, so what we were just briefly saying before we came on was that the importance of making sure that the electricity that's going into those charges is coming from as much renewables as possible, and that seems to be one of your.
Yeah.
I mean, could you give us a brief background of your company and what you're doing?
So we fit solar panels across the UK. We are finding now, like yourself, a lot of people with EVs want to sort of complete the dream, if you like, and have the solar panels on the roof. We tend to recommend to put it with a battery now because it counteracts where there wasn't a feed-in tariff. You can do some time of use charging, so you can charge your electric car at night for very little. You can also charge your battery at night in the winter when the solar isn't doing as well on a low tariff. So Octopus, Ecotricity, there's lots of guys here that facilitate them. So we also found quite a lot of people have the smart chargers too. So you can have a smart Zappy charger, for example, or there's similar as about there. So if you've got your car on the drive in the day and your solar panels are generating lots of power, some of the domestic batteries that we might fit might not take all of the power from, say, a 4 kilowatt solar system across the day in the summer, but the battery in a car will. So you can have your car parked on the drive, you put a smart car charger into it, and you're just charging it directly from your solar panels, which is great. So I do the same, so I drive an electric car, so my Monday morning drive to work is off sunshine, because of course Saturday and Sunday, bar this weekend, although it's not sunny, is when my car's on the drive with my Zappy plugged in and charging them from the free electricity from my solar panels.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who this is your first visit, it's definitely worth having a look at the My Energy stand, which is literally just on the way out, because that I have one of their chargers, and it just makes it a no-brainer, because you don't have to be clever and think about it. You plug the car in, it doesn't start charging. Say you plugged in at night, won't charge. In the morning, when the sun comes up, any electricity you're not using in the house will go into the car, and it's a to use very simple system, very sophisticated system. So as soon as it senses any electricity going into the grid from your solar, it puts it all in the car. And I've done, I think it's around 20,000 miles in my old Nissan Leaf. Yeah. Just from solar, like from nothing else, over a couple of years. I mean, it really is, and I'd forget that it was plugged in because it wasn't doing anything. And
it's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd be walking past with a bucket of vegetable peelings, and I hear beep beep, and it just turned it on. I went, oh my god! So it is a really, I mean, that's a kind of key thing. I think you'd agree with this, Chris, is that once that stuff's in, you want it to operate as with the least amount of hassle for the person with the solar. You don't want to be thinking. I mean, I do, because I'm a bit of a nutter. I'm always checking my levels and seeing how. But you want it to do it in the
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think as we sort of move towards the smart home, I think there's a very interesting question about where the smartness sits.
Yes.
Does it sit with the home, or is it actually smart people in smart homes? I think for most people's lifestyles, that they're not going to want to follow the electricity price in real time through every day and behave appropriately at all times of day. They would much rather have their devices saying, "Hey, it's cheap right now. Let's charge this car. We've got some free solar." So I think we're going to see sort of increasing smartness, sitting within both these sort of dedicated car charging technologies, but we may also see it come through to other appliances as well.
Yeah.
Could I just say, we get really excited by that, and so we're not just a fluffy startup. We want to try and be a profitable business as well, but we are quite ethically driven. And one of the things when you look at the EV charging market, or the EV market in general, is it's dominated by people with driveways and people who have the money to be able to buy them so far. Now, there are some great leasing car schemes like EVZ and others that are out there that mean that EV is more affordable. But one of the other aspects is actually where you install the chargers and actually how you can then reduce the energy prices as far as possible. So we hope in the next few months to be able to announce some interesting partnerships with some of the social housing development companies where you can start to deploy this sort of technology to not only get chargers out there, but then to get the power cost as low as possible by using the free energy from the sun to actually enable people to charge their cars as quickly and as cheaply as possible.
Right. So, I mean, what is the story across the board in this change that we're witnessing is the importance of that integration. Because if you've got someone over there with solar and then someone here with a charger, and you go, that really needs to be talking to each other, and that needs, that's a really important aspect of it.
Yeah, and so going for the developers is key for that.
Yeah.
Because from February next year, they all have an obligation to be putting charging points in. So if you compare that with the solar provisions, particularly on tenement blocks, there's a real opportunity there, both in new builds and retrofitting. So we see a big opportunity there.
Because that was when we were having a talk yesterday, someone, it's the first time I can remember a question getting a huge round of applause and a cheer from the audience, which was, why aren't there regulations insisting that new builds, this is really specifically new builds, have the maximum amount of renewables and storage and ground source? You know, when you're doing a building site and you're tearing up the ground and drilling things, that's when it should be done. I mean, it was
put the right amount of panels in as well, because a lot of new build plots, they'll put 4 panels in, which would obstruct the homeowner from putting 8 or 10 panels, a meaningful amount of solar to actually make a dent in the bill and do something for them. And it sometimes feels like a bit of a box tick exercise, as opposed to making it work, you know?
Yeah, it's something we see. I mean, there are regulations in place both for charge points, which where 20% of new car parking spaces have to have an EV charger.
Right.
But you could argue that that needs to be, you know, much higher fairly soon.
Minimum, yeah.
Buildings are really working around an overall carbon target for the building. So what we see very commonly is, you know, architects design a building that gets pretty close to the carbon target, and then they add some solar panels on the top just to finally meet it. So it's not uncommon for us to get asked for a quotation for a one-panel system, right? which is absurd and actually really grinds my gears actually when that happens. But that's really just because of the way those regulations are set up.
Yeah, yeah. I want to open these questions to the floor. I'm sure there's a lot of you who've got questions for our wonderful panel here. The first one is over there.
So we've just moved house and we've got a wonderfully large south-facing roof and we're putting solar panels on. And I've had 4 or 5 installers who basically said, no, we can't do over 4 kilowatts, even though I know we can do 8 or 10 kilowatts on our roof. But they just don't want to know. Or I know we haven't talked to Joju yet, so bear in mind. But
also the plants.
And yours as well. they just don't want to fill in the forms and paperwork. And I know there's paperwork, but why are they so reluctant if you're going with the 4 kilowatt threshold?
So we do a lot of DNOs for clients like yourself. So for me, as an EV driver who wants as much solar as he can, I understand the frustration, so I put pressure early on the business to start doing DNOs. So we started doing lots of DNOs a year or 2 ago. Originally, we got quite a lot of no's, so it put people off, whereas now we're getting quite a lot of yeses. It's very encouraging to put DNOs through. We also work with a lot of self-builders, so we're involved right at the start of the project, so we've got the time for it, so we'd be more than happy to put a DNO application.
I think if you explain what DNOs are, because...
Yeah, I was going to say...
Oh, right, sorry, yeah, so DNO, on a single-phase electricity supply, which is what most residential properties have, the grid restricts you to a 3.68 kilowatt system, or 4 kilowatt as it's just typically referred to, which means that you can only put a 4 kilowatt solar system on that can only export 3.68 kilowatts into the grid. The DNO is the district network operator, so we just make an application to them, so it could be Western Power or Northern Power Grid, and ask, can we fit a larger PV system in there and export so much? One of the other solutions is export limitation as well. And there's a lot of good products on the market, like the SolarEdge Modbus, where we could, if they said no, reapply and maybe ask for 8 kilowatts with a 3.68 limit, which means you'd only ever export 3.68 and it would just turn off if you go above that. But if you're going to use the power, i.e. you've got a battery system fitted, then it's very rare you're going to be exporting much anyway, and especially if you then maybe took a Zappian and to be extra safe.
So I have one more question, sorry. So with the government kiboshing solar by saying in October you could pay 20% VAT, I'm buying a battery and panels, and eventually a Zappi if they get the act together, one day when it arrives. Yeah. I didn't want to buy it before October. I wanted to buy the panels and the Zappi and all the rest of it ideally next year when we've only just moved house. I'm sort of not quite ready for it yet. Yeah. But 20% difference in VAT kind of makes you think, do it now or pay a lot more money.
Yeah. I mean, we do have finance options in place.
Yeah, but you're still paying it, even if you pay it slowly over time.
Yeah.
So how many of your installs are actually going to hit that VAT threshold? They say 60% cost, but if you have a battery, you're guaranteed that your costs are, I mean, the physical costs are actually well north of 60%.
Because it's only 20% above a certain amount. I could.
Yeah. So if 60% of material costs, then
yeah. So if you've got panels and a battery, I can't see how you wouldn't get 60% materials.
Yeah.
I mean, I think from my point of view, first of all, I think there's still some debate whether that regulation is going to come into force, and I think we're not getting too worried about it just now, other than the fact that it is already a news story and you've heard of it and you're worried. That's a worry, but the actual regulation itself doesn't worry me too much. I think it's also very, very loosely defined. So, what is material goods? Is the wire a material good? Is it just the panels and the battery? What about the mounting system? It's so vague. Right. I think it's very, very difficult to understand it, and I therefore think there's going to be so many loopholes in it that it will be fine. Anyway.
So would you recommend that? I mean, I don't want to get it done before October. I want to get it later. Would you recommend that if I waited, it's not necessarily a done deal? I'm going to be paying 20% VAT.
I don't think it's a done deal.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Any other questions? Young lady here.
Hi. So this is about curbside on-street parking. So I live in a city that is quite dense. It's got a lot of cycle infrastructure, a lot of cycle lanes, and they're removing 1,100 parking spaces to make spaces for bike parking. But they're also installing a lot of the pillar things with a cable coming out. But the problem is that people are trailing cables all over the place. They point out into the cycle lane, they point out into the pedestrian areas. What can we do to basically have this infrastructure without getting in the way of people on bikes?
Okay, so I'd say it's all about site design, really. So we see an awful lot of deployment of chargers that we don't necessarily think have been thought through properly in the way and positioning on the street. I think there's also a piece on parking. So we spoke to one London authority that said they'd lost £900,000 in a single year through converting to having dedicated EV-only bays. So we said to them, well, we don't require any dedicated EV-only bays because we deploy at scale on a street, so that we're sort of fairly certain that at least one of the bays will be available. And then we do a big education campaign, free EVs for people, to get people to switch very quick, as quickly as possible, so it minimises our utilisation risk. In terms of the cables, we think most EVs now come with a cable in them, so we don't have a cable attached to our kit. It's something that you plug into. But again, I come back to it, it's how you design the street. So if you were to come to our Southwark site, for example, nice wide pavement, we've used the existing street furniture, not just the pillars and the parking posts, but also the trees, to try and direct people and any other things that are moving along the pavement, whether it's scooters, dog walkers, or whatever it might be, cyclists maybe even, to make sure that they're not coming into contact with the charger. The charger is out of their normal route. And then we would choose specifically the type of charger from our portfolio that we would deploy. So in some instances, it's a wall-mounted charger if it's a car park. On the street, it's probably one of our geckos that sits on one of the posts, or it's the armadillo if you've got lots of space. But I think it's just about having a sensible conversation with planning and then also local residents to find out what makes sense.
Is there anything the car manufacturers should be doing with the position of the charging outlet?
Well, so, yes, I think so. I have an i3. I tried to go and charge fast charge with I think it was an ESB charger. It's on a dual carriageway near to where I live. It's a great charger. I wanted to use it. There are no plugging in points. You have to use the cables. You can only plug in if you have a front end charger. So the only way I could charge it would be to drive the wrong way down the dual carriageway to plug into it. I did contemplate doing that at 1 o'clock in the morning. I was that desperate for a charge, but I decided not to. So it's those sort of things that show a lack of thought or coordination between the charge point operators and the automotive industry. The ultimate solution is maybe induction charge or something along those lines. But again, I think, unfortunately, that's going to be something that's led by off-street driveways. But I guess we've tried to think about that by, again, separate the plug from the charger so we can plug an induction mat in already. So.
I mean, I think the long-term solution is, we can. I've used it. We filmed an induction charging plate probably 8-9 years ago. I mean, they do work, and I always assumed that there would be a massive energy loss because of that. And actually, it's about the same as a cable. It actually isn't an energy loss, but it's the installation of that is a bigger cost.
There's a great startup actually just come out of Imperial College called Bumblebee Energy, or Bumblebee Power, I forget the name, named after the Transformers, which said to me that they were techie sort of guys, so I had trust. But they've basically taken, one of the problems for induction mats is they weigh so much, so if you put them on the bottom of a car, they weigh a huge amount. So I think, don't quote me on the stats, but I'm pretty sure they've taken it from 40 kilograms down to 40 grams. Wow. Sorry, 400 grams. So the weight differential is been overcome, so that they had a really cool model where they were showing a drone flying over an induction mat. So the drone had no battery in it at all, so it was literally just flying off the induction power.
Wow.
So they've got some really cool stuff.
Yeah, right. I don't know if some of you may have seen the episode we did which was a Renault installation outside Paris, where there was a van driving at 60k, getting a 7.5 kilowatt charge as it drove along. But, you know, and you go, oh yeah, that's all right, then just put those in all the motorways. I mean, it would cost quintillions, you know, to dig up. We'd have to have all the motorways dug up and put that in. But I mean, it was interesting to see that it did work. Technologically, it is possible to drive and charge at the same time. But, you know, I think that's a long way off. Can we go to this gentleman here? Is that, oh, look at that. This is so easy. I thought this was going to be an absolute nightmare, this thing, but it's been brilliant. Thank you, sir.
Curbside charging. Where do you actually connect to the mains? Do you run your cable down the street, or also with Wi-Fi? Do you put in your own cabling?
Yeah, so this is one of our major costs. It's a fairly significant infrastructure work. We don't upgrade any of the power connections, but so we work off a 75 kV power supply. Ideally, we can do it at 35. We then come in and we daisy chain our chargers. So the idea is we put a feeder pillar at the end of the street. We put 15 nodes in, and we have two phases to delivery. One is the enablement phase, which is where we put those node boxes in. You know, the recycled boxes that go in the ground. And they're a sort of structural infrastructure that sits in the pavement, so 15 of them. That's the enablement. Then the cable goes in at the same time, or the ducting for the cable, for fibre and for power, and we then connect to the mains. And then the activation phase is when we then go and drop in the chargers into the boxes, which is a half-an-hour job per charger. The nice thing about that is it's half an hour to fit the charger. It's also half an hour to replace the charger if someone breaks it. So it's quite a neat system. But yeah, we connect to the mains at the feeder pillar. That's where we also put our Wi-Fi and our digital connection and some of our antennae.
Thanks.
Very good. Anyone over this side? No? You don't have to. Don't feel pressured. There were some more hands up that came up over here. Back there, yes. Oh, God, we might have to do a double throw. Yeah, it will be. Oh, it's not bad. Oh. There's only 2 injuries. There's St John's ambulance here. It'll be fine.
Hi, I live in near the city, Chester, and there's not one EV charging site in the whole of the city. So how do we get our local authorities to actually take this on board?
Badger them as much as you can. And if you've picked Chester, then I'd love that. Okay. So my mum has a cake company in Chester.
Oh, right. Okay.
So every time I get to go up there, I get fantastic cake. So I'd love to come up. We actually put a lot of investment into a request for interest that they did, and then it's sort of gone quiet. That was 6 months or so ago, so we would love to see them moving forward on it. I think, I'm not sure, but they fit under the Greater Manchester Authority, maybe?
No.
Do they not?
No,
okay.
No.
I wondered whether there was any sharing of thinking.
There isn't. No,
I think in terms of approaching councils, I think there's sort of two aspects to it. One is sort of for off-street chargers, where you really have to sort of approach the council and sort of badger them for a charge point, you know, exactly where you want it and where you live. I think most councils have public EV charging in terms of car parks and city centres on their agenda, and they will be at least looking at it in some way. And there are sort of, you know, government procurement frameworks that exist out there that make those procurement routes, you know, really quite slick and efficient for councils. So something like the ESPO framework, the Eastern Shires Procurement Organisation, would be able to run essentially a tender to, you know, companies like Solar Plants and Joju to go out there and put those charge points in. So we're kind of waiting.
Yeah, there's a lot of people.
Let's go. We're ready to go and do it. But
I've just had a quick look on ZapMap. Do you say Chester? So there are 7 chargers in Chester. So there are some.
I was twitching to check that.
But the only rapid charger is. Let me just check for you, madam. At the Holiday Inn Express, there is a Polar rapid charger.
Yeah, but that's off the right. That's nowhere near the city centre, though.
Yeah.
The city centre. I'm zooming in. Oh, is that? Yeah. I'm going to reappraise what I said. In the city centre, there are no chargers.
and there are none for if you want to charge at home and you don't have a driveway. So,
yes, exactly.
And it's as much as fast chargers. So I use one today driving here. They're great if you're driving a long way, but if you're not, there's nowhere more convenient than charging at home when you're watching Netflix or when you're asleep. We're refreshing our website. On there, we're going to have a portal where you can say, I'd like a charger. Tell us where you live. It then gives us more evidence to be able to go to the councils and say, look, we want to deploy here.
I think we've been asked this a lot this weekend, and that is basically the thing, is that we need to make our voices heard with the authorities that control these things. We need to tell them so that they start to hear, oh, there is a demand for this stuff, these weird electric people. I don't know who they are, but they want somewhere to plug in. I don't know what that is. You have to put your glasses on. I really don't understand. My diesel car is absolutely fine. What's all the trouble about? So, yeah, they're not all like that. They're not all like that. Sorry. We have to wind this up because Johnny Smith is waiting to come on and talk to some really cool people I've just seen there. They are so cool. But the people we've got on here, I think, are cooler. So please give them a round of applause. Thank you very much, guys. Well, that's all we've got time for. Please do subscribe to this podcast. We release an episode every week, and on that subject, I really want to thank Ben Bruton-Cox, who manages to keep the podcast going week after week, even when Johnny and I are all over the place and unable to record things, and I forget. And then Johnny promises that he's going to email and he doesn't. And then we've got to do the editing for the other episodes, and then we've got to go and shoot something. I mean, it's just, I don't know how he does it, but thank you, Ben. And we will be making some new episodes together. Johnny and I will be in the next couple of weeks. But we've both got quite a busy lineup of cars and amazing renewable things to go and see in September and October. It's going to be, I'm really excited about some of them, some amazing stuff. And all the stuff we've already shot. As I mentioned earlier on, the episode about First Light Fusion in Oxford, amazing stuff. And Helen Chesky is so good that we've got someone who knows how to ask questions about really complicated physics that help, a numpty like me understand them. I mean, I really did. I got it after I watched it. I went, I kind of get it. I get probably 65% of it I sort of understand. It's fascinating. I can't wait for you to see that one. There are glorious mounds of fresh video goodness coming your way soon on the Fully Charged Show. All kinds of subjects. Lots of cars, obviously, because there's so many cars coming out. Everyone's making electric cars, which is good. I'm happy about that. And of course, I must mention the Fully Charged website at fullycharged.show. What a brilliant address. Which is a veritable garden of clean tech delights. And finally, we must not forget the amazing Patreons who make this podcast and the YouTube series possible. There are now over 3,700 people supporting this show. I can't believe it. From $1 up to $10 a week. I mean, it's amazing. It's been a surprise and a massive blessing to have such support. So a big thank you to... That's on my computer. Fuck. I'll do it all again. And finally, we must not forget the amazing Patreons who make this podcast and the YouTube series of Fully Charged possible. There's now over 3,700 people supporting the show. It's crazy. And they support it from a mere £1 a week to $10 a week, which is the $10 a week. I mean, is it a week or it's a month? It's a month. Sorry. Last time. And finally, we must not forget the amazing Patreons who make this podcast and the YouTube series possible. There are now over 3,700 people supporting the show, from $1 up to $10 a month, which is incredibly generous. There's over 1,000 people who do $10 a month. And we're thanking them really slowly on the show, but it's taking longer than I ever thought it would. And it's been a surprise and massive blessing to have such amazing support and dedication from our wonderful viewers. So thank you so much to all our patrons. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.